Now, a couple of things happened last week that are just too delicious to let go. And one of them was when Roger Altman was here, and I tell y'all that this guy is like one of the most serious people in the country, and that you ought to pay attention to what he said. And, oh my God, let's see what Roger Altman said. Can we see that, Professor Sherman, by the way?
In the Times last Saturday, he said that, you know, what GE would do every quarter was that they would just sort of massage GE Capital so they can show a quarter-to-quarter improvement because that kept the stock up.
The greatest practitioner of that was not Jeff Immelt, current CEO. The man who invented that model, who honed it to a fine point, was Jack Welch. And actually, it's a good example because in that same article, I also the journalist said, maybe quoting somebody else, that nobody understood GE. It was a black box. But provided that they speak their estimates every quarter by 10 or 2 per share, everybody was happy. And for GE, not holds the all-time record, is one that holds is in the top 3 of companies in terms of the all-time record for consecutive quarterly improvements in earnings. They had something like 33, 35 consecutive quarterly improvements in earnings. Now, I don't want to suggest myself off as a sage, but I was a long-standing critic of GE. Because here's a company that's in aircraft engines and home appliances and a whole series of businesses that don't bear a lot of relationship to it. GE is a conglomerate. NBC, perfect example. And the idea that a company in these disparate businesses would organic, just by its real organic performance, have 33 or 35 consecutive improvements in quarterly earnings is flawed.
All right. Now, that was Tuesday night, New Orleans, Louisiana, Tulane University. What happened Friday in the Financial Times? Dominic said it's a dumb idea, executive focus on quarterly profits and share price gains. So basically, you heard some on Tuesday night, then you heard this guy say, well, we shouldn't have really focused on that for those 33 quarters that Roger Altman said that we were reporting these profits for. He said executive investors put shareholder value against popularity after the speech he made in 1881 was misplaced. But, so when I get these kinds of people in the classroom, we just can't turn this opportunity down. And you can't turn the opportunity down to have somebody who has that kind of detailed knowledge of the General Motors contract or what it means. Now, I don't know if y'all saw in the back of the room, but we got Mr. John King here. Now let's go to Steve Schmidt, who was McCain's campaign manager, who was here in, I think it was February, talking about
this stuff. Ready for it?
Yes, we're ready. Get it up.
Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt on September 15th, and John McCain goes out and he says, the fundamentals of the economy are strong. I was in Washington. I was immediately on a plane to Florida, where he is, and we try to make that the fundamentals of the economy, the American worker, is strong. But because McCain had said things over the course of the campaign in unscripted settings, which he did more of than any other candidate ever, and when you talk to reporters for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours a day about anything, you're going to have some moments. And one of the quotes he had given earlier in the campaign, you know, which he didn't mean, but he said, and when you say things like this, it's fair use by the opponents, we certainly would have used it in the same way we used John Kerry's quote of I voted for it before I voted against it 4 years earlier against it. John McCain had said, I don't know much about the economy. My expertise is on national security. And the next day,
okay, let's go to Sunday morning, CNN. Remember, right here?
Again, that's something to be debated at a different time. My point is, I thought he was judicious in not using the term mission accomplished.
All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the economy. It's a big issue. Americans sitting at home watching this program are worried about it. I want to give you a little contrast of then and now, talking about during the campaign, there was a big dust-up between Barack Obama, then a candidate and a senator, and Senator John McCain, his Republican opponent, about something Senator McCain said. Let's start with the then.
Our economy, I think, still, the fundamentals of our economy are strong, but these are very, very difficult times.
You and I know that not only was John McCain fundamentally wrong, it sums up the fact that he's out of touch.
That was then. Here's Barack Obama in the Oval Office just the other day, now.
We are keeping focused on all the fundamentally sound aspects of our economy, all the outstanding companies, workers, all the innovation and dynamism in this economy, then we're going to get through this, and I'm very confident about that.
Perhaps he's not as articulate as President Obama, James, but isn't that what Senator McCain was saying during the campaign?
No, it's not. I mean, that's not what he said. He said it was fundamentally sound, and then when they had to clean it up and they sent the whole campaign down to Florida, they said, well, what we meant to say is American workers and American companies are strong, which, of course, is what President Obama said. So not only is it not what he said was exactly what Senator McCain said after they sent the entire campaign down there.
I was in a tight spot and the light went off. John had me in a light. No, that's what they said when they went down to Florida to try to save their ass. All right, let's go back because, well, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about, they wanted to talk about, and we're going to talk about on the exam, is the role of earmarks, particularly in the campaign. Let's go back to CNN. Let's go to Sunday. And John, this is all before we knew you were coming.
Just after he started in September. So yeah, I think it makes the president's point exactly on point.
I see your head shaking, Bill.
Well, yeah, well, he said, I didn't know why he didn't run the quote. There's a quote where he actually just uses the words fundamentally and economy and sound all in one sentence. And Christina Romer just said it on Meet the Press a little while ago. Look, the indictment of Barack Obama, and that seems to be gaining strength, by the way, not from conservatives, but David Broder this morning, for Pete's sakes, Robert Samuelson, Howard Feynman, Warren Buffett, Stuart Taylor, all these people in the middle, is the guy just talks. He doesn't mean it. It's, the indictment was made, I think, most eloquently by his opponent in the primary, Hillary Clinton, who said it's speeches, it's words, it doesn't matter. I mean, he also was opposed to earmarks. And then he totally backs down. That is Broder's words this morning on earmarks when it came to this stimulus package. He talks about all this stuff, but it has no connection to reality.
James, we're gonna run out of time soon.
He never said he wanted to get rid of earmarks. That's just
oh yeah, oh sure he did.
Hey, we got to deal with it.
Earmarks is over.
Okay, all right. Who was right, Professor Carville or Dr. Bennett? We got 17 Republicans in here.
At the end.
Say what?
The part that he said about Obama's talking about getting rid of earmarks.
Did he ever say did he ever say that he was against all earmarks?
I don't think he said he was against all earmarks.
Okay. All right. He said reform. Said all that.
Yeah, I think his goal was mainly to increase transparency about earmarks, not to eliminate them. Just to back up your point, like that's what
everybody did their earmark reading.
I think a lot of it had to do with whether you're talking about earmarks for private companies or earmarks for the government, because he clearly firmly came out against earmarks for private companies. So
okay, but he never said he wanted to get rid of all earmarks.
No, and he said he was against non-judicious use of them.
Right. They use the term. Okay. If you say that you want for campaign finance reform, does that mean you want to get rid of all money in campaign? All right. If you say you're for ethics reform, does that mean you want to get rid of ethics? Huh? Okay. I want an argument against it. What?
I've got a quote here, and it says, Obama specifically said, when you've been taking all these earmarks when it's convenient, and suddenly you're the champion anti-earmark person, that's not change. I mean, words mean something.
Who is he saying that? Who is it? Well,
he's actually talking about Palin and her talking about earmarks.
But no, he was making the point. I'm not going to defend Obama because we're getting ready to attack Obama. Okay? But he was saying, you say you're against him, you took him and did it. I mean, it's entirely, that's completely out of context. All right? It was out of context. He never, have you found a quote where he said he wanted to get rid of all earmarks?
I'm looking at it.
You had 2 weeks. 2 weeks. All right, let's move on.
Hold on, I need to help our Republicans out here because they didn't do their research. There was a piece of legislation on the Hill last year. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton endorsed a 1-year moratorium on all earmarks. So he took an actual vote to ban all earmarks
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
Sure.
Okay, that's the best anybody can come up with. Okay, that's why you bet the big bucks. Now, let's talk about.
He's pledged to slash earmarks by more than half when he was
He
president.
didn't say that he wanted to get rid of them.
At least
Okay,
by half.
that's what I said.
Right.
He never said. I didn't say he didn't say he wanted to slash it. Did I?
He wants to bring it back to 1994 levels. Didn't he say he wanted to bring earmark levels back to the same
All right,
time as Clinton?
Yeah. How many people here think it's a good idea to get rid of all earmarks? Nobody? Reform-oriented? Nobody. Okay. All right. So.
I'd say if you completely overhaul the system, that would be preferable to having an earmark system per se. Like, get rid of it as it exists now and institute a different system by
Right.
which you can
Well, I mean,
introduce
like,
it.
what's the new system?
I'm sorry?
What's the new system?
Well, you introduce it through a committee.
To
And you
what?
have it.
Oh,
you
God,
have some
boy, that's
level
going to
of
help
oversight.
everything. Let's do it through it. One thing we know, but if a committee does it, it's all fine then. Good.
Better,
Okay.
better than just one person.
We'll refer to the subcommittee on subcommittees, and then they'll report on the commission on the commissions. And then when the commission report comes in, we'll have the blue ribbon panel review it, and then we'll send it up to the faculty committee. And then that way we know it's really going to get done. Then after it goes to the faculty committee, it goes to the executive committee, right?
Better that than one
That's
person.
it. That's it. That's what, because that got a long and glorious history. All right. What? How did the administration do Sunday on AIG? Huh? How did they do? Come on, we got 23 people that voted for Obama in here. Give it a shot.
I thought they did pretty lousy. I mean, like, they're basically saying we're gonna do everything we can to stop these things, but they don't want to just come out and say that they really can't, and they're just kind of stuck in the middle, and they're not really taking a strong enough stance against it.
The response was jumbled and inconsistent, and I thought it was very lousy as well because they didn't anticipate the obvious populist backlash that would have occurred.
Well, so is this kind of backlash, is this sort of populist thing of just sort of like, you know, kind of yahoos out in the country and they don't really understand the depth and complexity and nuances of the system? Is this really an outrage? What?
I think it's more of an outrage. This is American taxpayer dollars paying people who failed at their businesses.
So what do you think you should do?
I mean, you can't dictate to AIG exactly what they're going to do, but there's got to be something more than paying.
Well, I guess you own 80% of it.
The United States.
Scott Collins, he don't even own this place. He can dictate to me what to do. But again, go ahead. What? Say something. Move. Come on.
I mean, the government can dictate to AIG whatever they want. They own 80% of the company right now.
But why is the government bailing them out?
Tax it at 100%.
Why are they bailing them out? They're not going to bail out. If the dry cleaner goes belly up, they're not going to bail them out. Huh?
The whole argument where now they're too big to fail, so at this point we have so much money in them, you can't just let them crash.
It's a little bit, anybody want to take up, we can go a little bit deeper than that. What?
If derivatives in the way that like subprime mortgages were divided and distributed among many companies, that if AIG fails, the credit market will be so frozen that small businesses won't be able to tap into credit also.
Good. Be honest. What?
They underwrite so many loans that their failure would probably cause the collapse of a lot of insurance companies.
If anybody want to take, we're close but not quite. What they do, as I understand it, and believe me, is they underwrite a lot of things called credit default swaps. So the bank lends somebody money, they pay AIG to insure that loan. And if the loan goes belly up, then AIG has to, for a fee, they make it good. And this was something that they all kind of invented. And a bank like that, because it used to be that the bank had to have a reserve. So they couldn't, but this way they could lend out more money. And if they lent somebody $1 million, AIG would insure the loan, would insure to guarantee the payment of the loan for a fee of $100 or something. And so what happened was, when the economy went south and the housing market and everything, guess what happened? All the loans showed up to AIG. So the banks all have these deficient balance sheets now. The only reason they even have a balance sheet is because they're not having to carry the insured loans by AIG. They don't have to carry that as a loss. If AIG went belly up and the banks had to report all of the loans that they had insured, you'd have to bail the bank out anyway. That is, I understand it. If somebody can help me and clarify me, but that's my understanding of what happened is that they were insuring the loans of the banks, and the bank was paying them a small fee because they didn't want to carry the loan as a liability on their balance sheet. Now, the larger question here that somebody's going to ask is, how did we get at this point in our history in a position where one company could basically take the whole financial system down? And that's what we're told is happening. That you can't do, and I think nobody really, if you listen, no one really says we shouldn't bail AIG out. There's not, it's like, it's outrageous, they pay the people too much money, they shouldn't have the bonuses, they shouldn't do this, but I've not heard anybody like that really knew anything come up and say, well, you should have let them go belly up. And hell with it. Because my understanding is you would, if you did that, you would have to deal with it. But let's come back to this populism. All right? And we're going to talk to the speaker about this tonight. Two, what is populism? Tell me about it. Anybody want to tell me something? What do you kind of know about populism? Anything?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. That's okay.
Grammars, efforts, not take down the big guys. No respect for the big guys. No respect for the executives. They should report to the people.
But when we refer to it, that's okay. There's no wrong answer here. It's not an assignment or anything. When somebody says she's a populist, he's a populist.
Well, when I think of a populist, I think of politicians who message to the people. Like, it's all about empowering people, not empowering systems or government or something like that. It's about empowering us, like Palin or Brian.
Would Palin be a populist?
Brian in the turn of the century was a populist.
Right, okay. But
much
what are some elements of, would you say Palin's a populist?
I think the ability to...
I'm just saying, do you think she's a populist? Don't worry. So you think yes or no?
I think she is.
Okay, you think she is.
Yeah, I mean, it's the people against the elite. I don't think Palin would be a populist because, all the things she's got going with the kind of big oil.
But in her rhetoric is what she, again...
Rhetoric is so is Obama's.
No.
Right.
I think economic policy is inherent in the populist message, so Palin couldn't be, just because she.
But you can't be. Can you be a social populist? Can you say that the people in Hollywood are corrupting us? It's time to take it back. Do you just have to? Is populism sort of limited? What's the elements of it? But we hear the term, okay? People slinging around, man. We're on TV and they're a populist. They're going to populism.
You say that Spiro Agnew with the moral majority as Nixon's vice president was a social populist, saying that the people...
And Naylor and Naboos of negativism and...
I think it's kind of like a populism against the counterculture that was emerging at the time.
What did one of the things that I said might be a place that the Republican Party might end up? What?
Less Wall Street, more Main Street.
Oh, but
Anti-big.
Anti-big, be it government, entertainment, corporations, whatever. But so look at, the most famous. See if we can we pull up the Cross of Gold speech? See if it's
What speech?
Cross of Gold. I think it was 1896 Democratic Convention. Like, probably, and what happened is right at the turn of the century, right before the turn of the century, is basically if you were a farmer, and you think about this, if you were a farmer and you wanted easy money because you borrowed money to buy the land or get your crop in. So you wanted easy money, you wanted inflation because you wanted to pay it back. And if you were a banker, you wanted tight money because you wanted your money to be paid back in real money, and so you were for the gold standard. And Bryan was just sort of ultimate populist because remember, what was the last thing he did in his life? Right. So he was okay, let's go to the last paragraph, I think, which is probably the most famous paragraph in the history. If they dare to come out in open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we shall fight them to the uttermost, having behind us the producing masses of the nation and the world, having behind us the commercial interests and the laboring interests and the toiling masses. We shall answer their demands for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Now think about that. And think about the images that Bryan is evoking. I mean, it's just a mixture of religion and politics? Huh? And think about the kind of setup, if you will. And let's go back to that, because look, and these are just kinds of and then you go to the other one, is, since confront the proposition, is this nation able to stand? I will not slander either one, Massachusetts or New York. Wow, he's from Nebraska. It was called Orator of the Platte. They said his mouth was as wide as the Platte and his mind was as deep. The Platte is about 4 inches deep, by the way. I will not slander either one by saying helpless impotency as a nation of town business. It's over again. Our ancestors, but 3 million, had the courage to declare their political independence of every other nation on earth. Shall we, their descendants, when we have grown to 70 million, declare we are less independent than our forefathers? Patriotism. Does anything ever change in this business? Does it ever change? No, my friends, it will not be the judgment of this people. Therefore, we care not upon what lines this battle is fought. If they say bimetallism is good, but we cannot have it till some nation helps us, self-sufficiency, instead of having a gold standard because England has, we shall restore bimetallism and then let England have bimetallism because the United States has. I mean, can't you see just dripping out of what you hear now? I got news for you. This is, you come here, you pay all this money, you get this class, and it's so exciting, and you got everything. There's nothing new. It's all happened before. It's all there. You can see it. Are we going to let the French decide what we're going to do? Are we going to do whatever? He was there. We were just going through we're talking about waiting for your populism and going through the cross of gold speech and laughing about it. No, we got what we need done. We're not going to waste another moment. I'm not going to, everybody knows this, but you know the speaker was a PhD from Tulane, has been very, very involved in what's going on here in the city and this university, and his daughter, I saw his daughter, when she was born, they were living in 300 block of Loreline Street while he was in graduate school here. And I just, on behalf of everybody at Tulane was speaking, we want to acknowledge that we know the reason you're here is because Callista was for this, and we just appreciate it, and you have an open floor and talk about whatever you want and the Republican Party and the future of it, and I know that our students have some good questions. They better, because I will choke them to death if they don't. I'll hurdle over things and go get them. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, I partially had to come down here just to see what kind of people would sign up for a class with James Carville. I think, but actually it all started because he called me one afternoon, and he said, you know, Mary and I have moved down to New Orleans, and I'm going to teach a class at Tulane, and since I'm an LSU graduate, if I'm willing to teach a class at Tulane, you have a moral obligation to come down here and help me. So, and the thought of being able to do a class with James was almost more than I could deal with. So, I promptly said yes, and then we got to go. Then we tried to figure out how to make it all work. So, we're glad. Clifton and I are both glad to be here. I actually haven't got a clue what you guys want me to talk about. So, why don't we start there for a minute? What do you guys want me to talk about?
Direction of the Republican Party.
Direction of the Republican Party. Okay, that's the key theme? Beats me. Okay, now, what's the second topic you'd like to take up?
Earmarks.
Look, here's, when you think about all this stuff, and James and I have both been around in politics long enough that we've seen good years and bad years. As general, we prefer the good years. And they've been alternating. My good years have been his bad years, and his bad years have been my good years. We are at a point where there are 3 or 4 very big variables that nobody understands, and I want to put myself in the nobody group because I don't believe. Are we going to show a movie? If we're not going to show a movie, can I pull this up, or does that go up automatically? Good, because I like to write on the board. I actually used to be a teacher, and it makes me get all excited. Here's the number one thing you need to remember if you try to understand politics in the near future. We have not had an event like the current mess in 80 years. Now, that's very important. One of the things that I think James and I actually would agree on, and Mary can comment because she has known both of us a long time and she has seen both of us in politics. We both have a tendency to try to actually simplify politics so that there are a handful of key things that we then cue off of. I don't know if you've gotten this lecture from James, but it's really important. Okay, so the first thing for you to cue off of is an event we haven't seen in 80 years is big. And the first thing you know about an event you haven't seen in 80 years is nobody has a clue. So when you tune in on Sunday morning and listen to all these really smart people explain to you whatever they believe, remember, the reason they're doing that is they can't be on TV unless they know something. And so even if they don't know something, they have to pretend to know something. And if you actually track them week by week, you'll begin to figure out they were all wrong. You know, remember, the entire national elite said, we got to pass a stimulus package. If we don't pass the stimulus package, we'll be in desperate trouble. I'm not talking about this year, I'm talking about last year, the Bush stimulus package. Because remember, we are now in the mid-game of the Bush-Obama strategy. It's very important to understand that. On domestic politics, this is not true in social policy. It's probably not true in most foreign policy. But on economic strategy as it relates to finance, there's a Bush-Obama strategy. And this is part of why both parties are going to be so messed up in another 6 months. I mean, it's just going to be chaos. Okay, now what do I mean by the Bush-Obama strategy? I mean, you had last year, I think it was in March, somebody correct me, but I think around March, we had the $180 billion stimulus. Remember that one? $600 checks to everybody who wasn't well enough off to be hated. No money for people who are well enough off to be hated. So, of course, what that meant was if you were poor enough to get the $600 check, you did one of two things. You either paid off your credit card or you rushed off to Walmart and bought goods from China. So China was thrilled. They thought this was a great stimulus package. It didn't help the American economy at all. In fact, it put us $180 billion further in debt. So then I remember, because I was up at the Capitol doing some stuff, and we had the $345 billion housing package in July. Had to pass it. Vitally important. Going to really help bail out the housing project. Now, of course, it didn't work. So then in October, we got a twofer. In October, we got, first of all, the $700 billion Wall Street bailout. Which the worst Secretary of Treasury in American history had to have. because it was decisive and vital, and if we didn't get it immediately, who knows what bad things will happen. And we have to have it immediately, even though we can't spend it immediately, but if we don't get it immediately, we won't be able to spend it later. So if you don't give it to us right now, who knows what bad things will happen. So unless you want to be responsible for bad things, give me the money. Okay? Combined with the $4 trillion Federal Reserve guarantee. So by the time we got done with Bush's part of the Bush-Obama strategy, we were into the system for about $1.2 trillion in spending and about $4 trillion in guarantees. Y'all with me so far? Now this turned out not to be enough, so of course we immediately had to pass a $787 billion bailout, which no one was allowed to read, because if you had read it, you would have noticed there was a clause put in there by Chris Dodd, who got more money from AIG than anybody else, which happens to say AIG is allowed to pay bonuses. Which, of course, now that they're paying the bonuses, he hates, so he is now talking about passing a confiscatory retroactive tax to tax the bonuses. And, of course, you now have Geithner, who, having failed to do his own taxes for 4 years, is now cleverly come up with a $2 trillion potential bailout to pile on top of the $4 trillion, or guarantee rather, to pile on top of the $4 trillion guarantee. So you, as a citizen, are now on the hook for about $2 trillion in extra spending and $6 trillion in guarantees. And you all are young enough, this should be of some concern to you. Because guess who ends up paying it? Now, my theory of all this, which I'd be curious to get James's reaction to, is I actually think that there are two American political movements that are different than the two parties. I think there is a movement of the American people. He was describing populism. I actually think it's broader than populism in the historic definition. And I think there is a movement of big government and elites. And then what happens is that over time, this is Max Weber's sociological model, that over time the bureaucratic politician defeats the charismatic politician because of the sheer ability of bureaucracy to organize and focus energy. And so what you have is waves of change in America where you get a huge uprising of the American people, followed by a gradual reestablishment of the elites and big government until the next time you get a huge uprising of the American people. I'm going to come to that in a second, but I realize I shouldn't leave this without giving you a chance to ask questions. Is anybody confused about the Bush-Obama economic strategy before I go to the next question? Because I don't want to carry you beyond. Okay. You will notice it's a continuity. You do know who hosted the first meeting on Bear Stearns under the Bush administration. Anyone here know? Geithner. Why did he host the first meeting?
The chairman for the New York Fed.
Right, he's the president of the New York Fed. So the very first meeting to bail out Bear Stearns was Geithner. And who do you think held the first meeting to bail out AIG? Come on now, you got to get into the game. You got to think, right? Geithner.
What would be the consequences? Because we talked about this before you got here. Suppose you just said, let AIG go. We're not giving you a nickel. And they default on all of that.
My newsletter tomorrow morning says, replace the bailout with bankruptcy for all of them. Period, across the board. You got to get back to, and I'll come to why in a minute, but you got to get back to the rule of law. And you know what it means, James? It means all those really smart, sophisticated, multimillionaire investors who did all those counterparty trades are going to take a bath.
But, okay, but as I understand it, well, the stockholders have already taken the bath. There's nothing, right. They don't have.
But the bondholders didn't, and guess who the bondholders are?
Okay.
They're the people Geithner's protecting, like Goldman Sachs. $20 billion in AIG.
So the idea that the bank balance sheets, when they start carrying this, then let the banks go too?
They go broke. Guess what? We've done this before. And this is a very key question, and I would suggest to you two. I'm going to give you a lot of books during the evening because it's how I operate. Two of the books you need to read are Drucker's The Age of Discontinuities and Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Drucker makes the argument that if you know what's going on, it's a continuity, and you can draw a line. So those of you who are taking social science classes, you love continuities. And the challenge you have is, what if you come to a point in time where the world has suddenly changed? And so here I was, I kind of knew what I was doing, and now we have a break point, which we'll call a discontinuity. The truth is, you don't know what comes out of the other side. So 1929 is a break point. The collapse of the stock market is followed by the really stupid tax increase of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which is a tax increase, which is why the Obama tax increase plan is suicidal, and his energy tax plan is suicidal. That's then followed by each nation deciding to beggar the others, which is why the Mexicans have announced selective tariffs against American states to punish us for having paid off the Teamsters by breaking the NAFTA agreement on trucking. And you start down a game where states start attacking each other economically, you're going to see the world market disintegrate in a matter of a couple months. Then you will be poorer. But you don't know what comes out of the other side. You could not predict in 1928 Adolf Hitler, nor could you predict militaristic Japan, which did not exist in 1928. Both of these are side effects of the Great Depression. So you look at breakpoints. In a sense, in your lifetime, 9/11 was a breakpoint. I'll guarantee you George W. Bush did not wake up every morning in the first 8 months of his administration thinking, I can't wait to go to war somewhere and be a war president. And he woke up during the day of 9/11 and suddenly realized he had a big problem. Now, I'm not arguing for or against what he did. I'm just telling you, 9/11 was a breakpoint. Well, you're now in a breakpoint. And Drucker, the book, The Age of Discontinuities, is a work of genius, as much of Drucker's work is. He makes a very specific point, though, which I've watched with increasing dismay our system totally reject. Drucker says, look, there are laws for business and there are laws for government, and they are different. And if you try to apply the laws of business to government, you get corruption. And if you try to apply the laws of government to business, you get such stunning inefficiencies, you get permanent bankruptcy and permanent poverty. And so historically, the way we've done it is we've said to people, look, and I said this as early as last September, you can't have capitalism on the way up and socialism on the way down. And that's what all these rich guys wanted. All these rich guys were terrific as long as they were winning. You know, loved the big airplane, loved the big yacht, loved all the extra money. Then they started losing. They said, oh, please take care of me. The correct answer that morning was, get a lawyer, go to the bankruptcy court. Because you want to teach people around the planet, don't make stupid investments. What we're teaching them right now is get a lobbyist. It's a very dangerous model. I mean, we are right in the middle of an extraordinarily dangerous model of drifting away from the rule of law to the rule of politicians and bureaucrats. So this is kind of where we are right now. You with me so far? Now, historically, the model I live off of, it's slightly different, I think, than James, is the following basic dates. Anyone want to guess what those dates are? Okay. 1776, 1787, 1800, 1828, 1860, 1896 to 1916. You'll notice is the only real continuum. This is actually not a continuum. This should be and. 1932 and 1980 and 94. What are those dates? Anyone want to guess? Regime changes. This is the beginning of the American Revolution. This is about as disruptive as you can get. We have a novel coming out in October, a brief commercial, on George Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day. This was the real deal, okay? So the guys who fought the revolution go back home, Washington goes back to Mount Vernon, and in a few years they figure out that it's not working. And they get together in Philadelphia and basically pull off a political coup d'etat and create the Constitution, get it passed by all the states, create the government. Washington becomes the first president. And in that process, the Federalists, who are absolutely dominant, create a structure of power which is anathema to Jefferson and to his allies. And in the election of 1800, they annihilate the Federalists, which is important for a lot of different reasons. It's the first peaceful example of an opposition party fundamentally breaking a governing elite, and caused enormous tension. The Federalists are stunned at this idea. In fact, they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which is sort of the McCain-Feingold of that generation, and said that you are not allowed to criticize the government or you could go to jail. They actually put Jefferson's allies in jail. We had one of the Federalists who proposed that no one should be allowed to criticize between election days, that the government, once it's elected, should be treated with the same respect as the British king. Remember, in Britain, direct criticism was treason, which is why, for example, the Whigs wrote indirectly. Washington's favorite play is Cato by Addington, which is a play about the Roman Empire, because Addington, in order to make his point about the corruption of the British Empire, had to write about Rome, because it would have been treason to have written exactly the same thing about the British Empire. So the Jeffersonians win. By 1824, the Jeffersonians have grown tired, corrupt, and the status quo. They're totally dominant from 1800 to 1824, totally. The Federalist Party disappears. And in 1824, and one of the great moments in a book I want to recommend to all of you, although I'm hesitant to say this in front of James, because if he reads it, we'll be in big trouble, is the election of 1828 by Remini, which is one of the two books I used in designing the 1994 campaign. And what Remini studies is this great moment. I mean, you talk about populism. In 1824, in fact, we were looking today, we were down at Jackson Square. I don't know how many of you have gone down to the battlefield? This is pathetic. You're in New Orleans. One of the great battles that defined this country's history is Jackson at New Orleans. At some point before you leave, go down there. Go all the way past the French Quarter. It's on the other side of the French Quarter. It's downriver. But it's worth your seeing. Jackson was one of the great characters in American history. And in 1824, he got 40% of the vote, but John Quincy Adams, the son of President John Adams, and Henry Clay ganged up against him. And so even though he came in first, but without a majority, he got about the same percentage actually as Lincoln did in 1860. But the Electoral College map was different. So in the House of Representatives, they took the presidency from it. Well, unlike Al Gore, who decided that, well, he thought George Bush had stolen the presidency, he was going to be a good guy and go home, Jackson said, I'm just going to break you. And so for 4 years, he waged war. Remini points out that at one point, they're printing weekly newspapers that are totally partisan, and they're franking them. So they're using the power of the frank, that is tax-paid mail, to send 1.5 million newspapers a week. This is in a country whose total population is probably 26 million. And they just crushed them in 1828. And the Jacksonians become very dominant. They are very populist and very anti-establishment. Gradually, the system decays. And in 1860, we have one of the most extraordinary elections in American history. And Abraham Lincoln wins. And in reaction to his winning, the South secedes and 620,000 Americans are killed. But it is a decisive establishment of a northern industrial coalition which dominated the country from 1860 to 1932. From 1896 to 1916 is in some ways the period that I'm modeling what I'm doing at American Solutions, which I commend to all of you to go look at americansolutions.com. The corruption of the system became so bad that in both parties there was a rebellion against the old order. And you have this very broad, we describe it at American Solutions as a tripartisan movement because it's Democrat, Republican, Independent. But you get the muckrakers, you get the Shame of the Cities, the Octopus, the Jungle, a whole series of novels and books that fundamentally take on the establishment. And by 1912, the country has had this conversation with itself. And in the election of 1912, the reactionary Republican president, William Howard Taft, gets 24% of the vote. The three candidates of change, Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Eugene V. Debs, get 76% of the vote. I mean, the country's just decided this is over. And you get a brief and intense period of reform, which is then cut off by the First World War. 1932, you get an election largely brought about by the sheer pain of the Depression and then transformed by the political genius of FDR. And if you want to understand American politics and the capacity of a leader to change things, there is no single person better to study than FDR, unless maybe it's Lincoln, although they're stunningly different personalities. But since none of you are likely to be Lincoln, FDR is a more reasonable gamble. FDR was truly extraordinary as a leader. And he creates the modern Democratic Party. And to give you some idea of their dominance, from 1930 to 1994, the Democrats controlled the U.S. House for 60 out of 64 years. Now that's dominance. Almost the liberal Democratic Party of Japan. Just total one-party rule in the House. Not as much in the Senate, and certainly in the presidency were very competitive. But in the House, they absolutely had total dominance. 1980, Ronald Reagan comes along, and Callista and I just finished a movie, second commercial, movie called Rendezvous with Destiny. And I commend it to you from this standpoint. Reagan is like a great athlete or like a great ballerina. When seeing him in film is totally different from reading about him, because the body language, the smile, the voice, the patterns are radically more powerful when you watch him than if you try to read and understand what did he do. Just as listening to FDR on radio, if you get a chance to listen to his radio tapes, you begin to understand the power he had. Reagan is very important in solidifying and consolidating the conservative majority in this country. We have a little blip with George H.W. Bush, who forgets he's supposed to be a conservative. You then have a third-party candidate in Perot. You get Bill Clinton, who wins, and then foolishly listens to the Congress, passes a bunch of really unacceptable bills, and in '94 we win for the first time. We hold the House for 12 years after that, which is the first time since the 1920s. So these are my models. Now the challenge for you all and the challenge for the Democrats is 2008 one of these, or is it 1976? And you don't know. I would say something, if I had come down and talked to you in December, I would have said a much higher likelihood that it is in fact a historic election. Having now watched this administration for 2.5 months, it's much more likely that it's 1976. Now just to put that in context, since all of you are relatively younger than this, anyone here know what happened in 1976? I knew you knew. I'm trying to figure out if they know. I mean, you and I were there. That's not the same. Carter won, and turned out to be one of the great dweebs of American history. I mean, this was a man who was not personally in touch with reality at any point for 4 years. And gradually that catches up with you. He, by the way, had higher approval ratings than Obama on the day he was sworn in, because he was a Rorschach test. He basically said, project onto me whatever you believe in and I'll smile. And so people did. People were tired. The economy was much worse than we remember. I mean, the last 4 years under Reagan and Ford were not good years economically. They were disgusted under Nixon and Ford. They were disgusted by Nixon and Watergate. The left-wing news media had gone berserk. And we dropped at one point in 1975, we were down to 17% party ID. That's how bad it was.
But Speaker, you almost won the '76 election.
Yep.
Mississippi, but for Mississippi, Ford would have been reelected. You didn't almost win the '08 election. I mean,
look, I agree with that part of it. Although, remember, you could argue pretty decisively the country was actually statistically much more Democrat in 1976 than it was in 2008 as a country. If you look at the total underlying popular opinion patterns. But the only point I'm making is not, I think the challenge for Obama is actually the challenge that George W. Bush faced. George W. Bush failed to perform. Failure to perform is the greatest problem an American president can have, because we are a ruthlessly consumer-centric country. And when something doesn't work, we change. I mean, how many of you have ever changed a brand? All of you, right? So just think about it. And what happened was the Republicans, starting in '05, and I actually think this city was the first enormous breakpoint, although I think the first big mistake was the Social Security plan. But this city then became the breakpoint, because when Bush came down, this is my personal analysis, and I don't know if any of you agree or if James agrees, but when Bush came down here and said, Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job, I think the whole country just looked and thought, this guy is out of touch with reality, which is the Jimmy Carter problem. And the country, as a general rule, does not like presidents who are out of touch with reality, because they think it's very dangerous. And they also said, if you can't figure out what's going on in New Orleans, why do I believe you about Iraq? And from that point on, if you look at the polling data, he never recovers after coming down here. Go ahead.
I want to no.
Here you go.
Though you said something, I
just want to lure you out here.
Because it seems to me that you're suggesting, you're suggesting, and it's that economically, the Bush and Obama administrations were a continuum of the same sort of Wall Street party.
Yes.
Okay. And your suggestion to, because this we sort of for Republicans, is to become a more, is populist a better word, or to sort of be less Wall Street, less corporate party, more. Is that
well, I wouldn't use populist, which has a particular majority, but I would go back to the Roman model of popularity. That is, there was a party which ultimately Caesar headed at the end, which basically said, in a fight between the elites and the great mass of people, be on the side of the great mass of people.
Right.
And if you look at most of America is not sympathetic with AIG.
No.
Okay.
But traditionally, I just want to explore this, because traditionally the argument has been that the Republican Party was divided between social populists and economic royalists.
Right.
And that your model seems to be for the Republicans that after we go through the troubles or whatever we're in now,
yes,
that the Republicans need to emerge not just as a socially populist, well, I don't want to use the word populism, is a party that espouses not just angst socially, but angst against economic power, just not just entertainment power, or press policy or something.
I don't think it's angst. I mean, I think...
Or anger.
I wouldn't even say anger. I would say, let me try a different way of saying this. Jack Kemp went out in '79 to try to convince Ronald Reagan to be for a 3-year tax cut, the Kemp-Roth tax cut plan. Right. And I talked to Jack before he went out, because I was a freshman member and I was part of the Kemp wing of the party, which was clearly fundamentally different than the old guard Republicans.
Right.
And Kemp came back laughing, and the deal he had cut with Reagan was that Reagan would be for the 3-year tax cut and Kemp would be his national campaign chairman. And he came back laughing because he said they were having lunch, and somebody came in and said, the Wall Street Journal just came out, and John Connolly carries Wall Street executives by 87%.
Right.
And he said Reagan looked up, took about 3 seconds, and got a huge smile and said, perfect. I'll represent Main Street. He can represent Wall Street. We'll see who wins.
But in our lifetime, in the Republican stump speech, the villains have included Hollywood, the media, elites in general, but it's never been, the basic Republican stump speech has generally not incorporated Wall Street or corporate America. My question is, as we go forward, do you see that Wall Street becomes one of the villains with Hollywood or with the media or other people that gang up on people? Do you see this sort of emerging in the future of the party?
Well, I think, what my advice to the party is going to be that that a party which is actually willing to be for free markets and is willing to explain that there are winners and losers in free markets, and that rich guys who lose shouldn't be made winners by the government, is, I don't know whether you want to call that it's not making Wall Street the bad guy. I'm saying there are guys in Wall Street who are pretty smart. I know several guys, for example, who got out of the market in 2007 because they looked around and they said, this is just stupid. I know guys who quit buying houses because they looked at the prices and said, this is impossible. Okay, so what I don't like about the left is the left wants to say, on the one hand, let's punish the guys who are successful, and on the other hand, let's take your tax money and give it to the guys who are failing so that our friendly millionaires over here get to fail slowly. I think that is a disaster for this country. But this is I guess this is the part that's different, James, that doesn't fit the language of American politics. Ronald Reagan had actually read Hayek and Friedman.
Right.
Okay. He actually believed in this stuff.
Right.
Okay. So it wasn't a question of villains or not villains. Hayek basically says in The Road to Serfdom, you cannot have a planned society that doesn't become a totalitarian state.
Right.
Because you can't coerce people into doing what the planners want unless you're willing to punish them.
Right.
Friedman says basically, as Adam Smith had said, so Friedman is really just a modernization of Smith, in the long run, you as a customer are more powerful than you are as a client of a bureaucracy. And if we give you the power as a customer, you'll make choices. And that's why his book is, his TV series is called Free to Choose. And what Reagan is saying, Reagan didn't have villains in the traditional sense. I mean, except the Soviet Empire, which was evil. Which I think, you got to pick villains, the Soviet Empire. Look, I'm happy to be anti-Al Qaeda. I mean, you want to get a victim.
Right.
You want to get someone
But the media in Hollywood have been traditional villains of modern republicanism.
Well, it's pretty.
I mean, but I'm not.
Let me paraphrase. Let me paraphrase Harry Truman. Harry Truman was once told, "Give him hell, Harry," and he yelled back, "I don't give him hell. I tell the truth, and it feels like hell."
I'm not trying to. I'm over up to the kids. I'm really not. I'm not trying to be here. But one of the things that we talked about in the class is that will modern republicanism emerge into distrustful of all things big, be it Hollywood, be it the press, be it the university elites, and up to and including Wall Street and corporate America. That there's a possibility that you have a move to come back and say the only people that you can really trust are the people in your community. Is that an unreasonable place to see?
I mean, first of all, Republicans trust the military far more than Democrats do, and the military is a fairly big institution. Right. I mean, General Petraeus doesn't exactly, head up the Keystone Cops.
Do you see that as the Republicans becoming more?
No, I don't think. I think where you and I differ.
I'm not one, so I'm.
Okay. Okay. Let me just come at it from a different angle. I mean, do I think some people, particularly our dumbest consultants, are going to go out and try to find a villain because that allows them to quit thinking? Yes. I mean, these are people who make a living by making TV commercials attacking people mindlessly. I mean, the people who designed the 2004 campaign, I think, basically crippled the Republican Party because instead of having a fight over ideas, and I wrote a paper you can find at newt.org about a governing majority, and we laid out that on 53 different issues, John Kerry's basic position on 53 issues, he was in 77 to 17 minority. He was to the left of Teddy Kennedy. And you could not get the Bush people and their consultants to understand you wanted to run an idea campaign.
I know this because we were debating we were doing events together during the 2004 campaign. All right. I'm going to turn it over. Students.
Yes, sir.
I just don't see how Republicans can become the party against Wall Street when they've spent the last 30 years deregulating Wall Street to the point where they've been allowed to do what they've done, like men like Bill Graham, who ran McCain's economic wing until he said the nation of whiners thing. I mean, like, is it just gonna, like, a switch comes off?
Let's look at deregulation. You have a 200-person office to look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. 200-person, $62 million a year budget, federal regulatory agency to look at two places. They're useless. Warren Buffett said, I look at more than 2 companies a day by myself. What were these people doing? You passed Sarbanes-Oxley, which cost the average small company $3.8 million a year in compliance and achieves nothing. You had plenty of regulations to go after Madoff. That's a criminal problem. So I want to start with, first ground rule is we ought to slow down and find out what went wrong. And what you're going to find out is it wasn't the failure to regulate. The first thing that went wrong is you had a couple of companies making a ton of money who were supposed to be like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, who were supposed to be evaluating accurately the value of paper. And they were lying. Well, this gets you right back to Enron. 15 people at Enron went to jail. I mean, when you break the law, there ought to be a consequence, as opposed to saying, why don't we pass another round of regulation on top of the regulation we have so we can really be totally screwed up? And so I want to start with, my position is very simple. If the Republicans want to immediately become different, all they've got to say, and this is what I'm saying tomorrow in my newsletter, stop the bailout. Now, I'm not anti-Wall Street. Those Wall Street companies that are healthy are going to survive. Those Wall Street companies that are unhealthy aren't going to survive. I represented the Atlanta airport for 20 years. We went through deregulation. I had 18,000 people at Eastern Airlines in my district. Eastern Airlines disappeared because the machinist union and the management decided it was more fun killing each other than it was running an airline. Now, what happened was AirTrans replaced them. It took 3 years. But the idea that we should have intervened and bailed out Eastern and propped up Eastern and given them whatever they needed because they were too stupid to get together is a crazy way to run a free market. And so the Republicans can very rapidly start to regain a position by turning it into a principled argument that the government is incapable of managing the American economy, and the idea of the Treasury bureaucracy micromanaging Wall Street is an absolute dead loser.